Hello, the brave, the courageous. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Jordan. So I have something I want to talk about today. I want to talk about fear. I want to talk about being scared. I want to talk about spooky. So, fear, the nature of fear. So fear is it's this adaptive alarm system. It's the brain's way of predicting threats and mobilizing, this survival energy that keeps you alive. It's not just an emotion. It's information. It's the body saying something might change for the worse and you need to prepare yourself. And so what you do is you become afraid. So there's an evolutionary role to fear. Prehistoric humans, the ones that startled easy were the ones that survived longer. Also, counterpoint, the ones that didn't got to breed more. So there's this dichotomy between these two things, fight, flight, or freeze. These are primal systems for survival. It's triggered by the amygdala within 150 milliseconds of something happening. And it's telling you, pay attention. So curiosity is it's fear's twin. Both are a response to uncertainty. Both of them are going, what's this? It's just how you're reacting to it. Fight, flight, freeze. So there's different systems of survival. One that is often not talked about is another F word. It's finesse. This is the highest evolutionary response to fear, in my personal opinion. We're going to get into that later. But there's modern misfires from the limbic system of threat detection. Oftentimes people get stuck in situations they don't want to be in because they're afraid to take that step into uncertainty. So we know fear abstracts losses, rejection, failure, disapproval, and it's not just for predators anymore. It's fear of judgment, fear of humiliation. And so there's this constant fucking low-grade fear that results in amygdala fatigue, just constant stress about the future. I think that depression is when somebody gets stuck in the past. Anxiety causes this amygdala fatigue, and it's people that get stuck in the future and going over every scenario of what could go wrong. If I want to make a trip, a journey, an adventure 5 blocks from my house, I can sit in front of my computer and plot out 100,000, maybe 1,000,000 different routes to get to the same location. But none of that is actually giving me certainty or taking action on that journey. I'm tricking myself into thinking that I'm doing something. So the news, social media, all of these things, the people talk about, psyops or about control mechanisms. What the powers that be, if you want to call them that, are doing is they're controlling the narrative. This is mind control. Controlling the narrative is how you control people and control people's minds. So fear is weaponized through dopamine and this cortisol loop and this outrage economy in order to keep people in a state of constant anxiety and fear. And so physiologically, when you're afraid, adrenaline surges, the heart races, blood goes to your muscles, cortisol. It sustains alertness, but it drains your immune system being in this state. You know, that's COVID. Keep people afraid and they'll fucking get sick. So too much of this, it gives you this tunnel vision. Too little fear, it gives you apathy. You don't give a fuck about the future. And so finesse, fight, flight, freeze. Finesse is this state of learning to stay conscious, staying in your prefrontal cortex, overcoming fear with courage and logic while within fear. Finesse is the ability to talk your way out of the situation, to de-escalate, to make people see your perspective by understanding their perspective. This is the highest expression of humans overcoming fear. So courage, it's not a lack of fear. It's a resistance to fear, mastery of fear. It's not the absence of it. So there's a quote, I can't remember the fucking guy. It's fear is a natural reaction to moving closer to the truth. Like they say, the truth will set you free. But I mean, being too truthful will alienate you from your fellow man. People are not prepared for the truth. They will respond with fear when you present it to them. They will respond with personal attacks. They will call you names if you mention a truth that they are not ready to receive. And so anxiety, it's just fear without a trigger. It's this constant drip. It's this constant drip of fear. So throughout the ages, you know, ancient cultures, they understood and they mythologized fear. So I love etymology. Etymology, understanding where words come from, it shows you the progression of how human beings think. It shows you the progression of the human psyche. The Old English word fair, it meant sudden danger. The Greek phobos, which is where phobia came from, it meant source of phobia. And phobos, you know, these feelings, these emotions, they were embodied by gods and they told stories about these gods. So Phobos was this god. Latin was timor or timid is where that word comes from. Sumerian texts like 4,000 years ago, they described fear as trembling before the gods, and it was a sacred emotion. You know, we're taught, maybe not anymore, but Western culture was taught to fear God. Love and fear God like you would a father figure. My mom, she could fucking scream at me all day. That's what moms do. They don't have emotional regulation over their tone. And so it becomes this that you just get used to. My dad, when he raised his fucking voice, and I have two dads, neither of them ever got physical with me ever. They did not have to. Their tone was enough to strike fear into me, and their presence and their stare was enough. My mom, you know, she lit up my ass when I was a kid. So did my sister, but I'm not afraid of them. I was afraid of my father because he had a presence to him. So Mesopotamia, fear like maintained cosmic order, you know, obey the gods to keep chaos away. You know, follow the rules of society and the rules the gods have laid out to us of how we should interact with each other, and chaos will stay away. You do not want your culture to fall into chaos. So fear is a powerful tool for controlling people. I do not fucking envy the people that rule the world. I would not want that responsibility. The only mechanism that they have is fear to control people. In Egypt, Mat, which means order, versus Isifet, which was chaos. And moral living equaled literally like taming the fear of disorder. And so there's this concept that disorder is what you should be afraid of. Chaos is what you should be afraid of. But the other end of the spectrum, over-ordered societies, like, fascist societies, that is also something that you should be afraid of. You do not want too much chaos. You do not want too much order. It's a balance and an interplay between those two things. So Greece, they personified fear. Phobos was a personified fear in this god. It's not evil, but it's like this necessary companion to Ares, which was war. So these two, they were friends, fear and war. In Rome, Stoicism, Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than reality. We let fear get the best of us. People get stuck in these positions. And the mind frame of getting stuck is, what should I do? Should I do this? Should I do that? Nobody becomes a doctor. Nobody becomes a $350,000 a year engineer by accident. They say, I am going to do this. I am going to do that. And it doesn't matter what the fuck gets in the way of them. Men are terrified of talking to women. They're terrified of rejection. What's the worst that can... You go up to a girl, you say, hey, I think you're cute. You want to hang out? Can I have your number? They go, no. Okay. That girl, she likes Pepsi and you're Sprite. That doesn't mean that there isn't a fucking huge market cap for Sprite. It's just you were selling it to somebody that likes Pepsi over Sprite. There's no consequences in rejection. There's zero consequences in failure. If you want somebody to get something done, talk to somebody that's failed 1,000 times in a row. I've only recently found, success monetarily in my life. And it's because for a decade straight, after I gave up being a musician, I just threw things against the wall and failed over and over and over and found my way to the thing that was the right fit for me. I've got friends that every time I talk to them, they've got a new business idea. And I go, great. When are you starting? They go, I need to do some research. You're tricking yourself into thinking you're doing something. So Christianity, it reframes fear into a reverence for God or a fear of God. And this is the awe and the humility that human beings have when they encounter the infinite, the beginning, the primordial. Dante saw fear as this purgation. It's a descent before the ascent. You get stuck. That's what purgatory is. It's this layer between reality and heaven and hell where you're stuck. And people, almost all people, they're in purgatory in their lives. Heaven and hell is not an external realm. It's here right now. And so many people are stuck in that purgatory for fear of failure, for fear of judgment. And so in the Renaissance period, humans, they study fear as the psyche's mirror. It's something that you're supposed to move towards. It's you. You're afraid of yourself, essentially. In modern science, Darwin, 1872, he was the first to catalog fear's expressions, the facial expressions of fear. Freud said fear was a suppressed desire. I think that's incredibly true. People talk shit on Freud all the time, but he broke so much fucking ground. People do not give him credit for how right he was about so many things. Carl Jung, he saw fear as this thing that needed to be integrated. It was a part of our shadow subconscious, this part of ourselves that we did not want to look at, but shows up whether we want it to or not. And it required us to integrate that part of ourselves in order to become fully actualized. And so the 20th century, it took fear after Freud laid out what it is, and it propagandized it. And we started to use it to control behavior. You know, the Nazi Germany made huge leaps and bounds. You know, fear of the Jew, fear of the Western world, fear of the consequences of what would happen if communist Russia came through Poland and overtook them. That's why they took Poland first, is because they're afraid of the communists. And so Nietzsche said that fear is the mother of morality. This is very true. You know, you should be afraid of the consequences of your actions unless you're moving forward with intentions of helping and doing good and improving your life and other lives. I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, there's secondary consequences for the things that you do that you deem good. And as long as you're prepared to face those consequences, there's nothing to be afraid of. But, you know, fear was necessary in creating a healthy culture. So culture today, I mean, the most amount of violent crime happens in areas that have no gun laws. The areas of North America that have open carry, not a lot of people want to fuck with other people in those areas. So when there are dire consequences for you acting out of line, there's very good, very justifiable reason to be afraid of the consequences of your actions. And so there's a thing, a message that is embedded in every religious practice throughout history. It's repeated over and over and over and over again in every fucking culture. And it's the counterpoint to one thing. Human beings do not need to be told to be fearful. It is wired into our limbic system. It is the reason our ancestors survived to a certain extent. We do not need to be told to be afraid. It's a very powerful tool of manipulation, but nobody needs to be told to be afraid. I mean, there's certain medical conditions where people don't have any fear. All those people end up dead. But for the most fucking part, people don't need to be told to be afraid. And so there's this shared pattern across cultures. The term fear not, it appears 365 times in the Bible, which is, you know, kind of magical. Depends on the translation, but, you know, it's almost one for every day of the year. You're being told by God, by the disciples of Christ, by Christ himself, do not be afraid. Nearly all faiths, and that's what religions are called, is faiths, not fears. Faith is what overcomes fear, and they're called faiths. All faiths use fear not as an initiation into trust. So in Judaism or Christianity, Isaiah 41:10, fear not, for I am with you. Luke 12:32, fear not, little flock. The message is fear less about outcomes and trust that the universe and God are conspiring in your favor for you to be successful. Overcome your fear is what the Western canon is telling you to do. In Islam, the Quran 3:175, do not fear them, fear me if you are believers. Fear is redirected. So from worldly power to this like moral consciousness. Fear me, Allah, God. Do not fear them. In Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita, Arunja was paralyzed by fear. And Krishna reframes it as an illusion. Fear is an illusion. Fear dissolves through the right actions, through taking a step, through meeting it with courage, through finessing it. In Buddhism, Buddha faces Mara, fear or temptation. Sits still. And the realization is fear is a projection. You know, I have a friend that's afraid of judgment. Social anxiety, he calls it. What I learned about him, though, is he's constantly judging everybody, everywhere he goes. So his fear of judgment is a projection onto other people. People are in their own fucking little worlds. They don't give a fuck what you do. And if you do something insane, they're going to forget about it in 2 days. It doesn't matter. In Zoroastrianism, it's good versus evil. Courage through truth. Asha dispels Druj, the lie. In Taoism, Lao Tzu, one of my favorite religions or philosophies. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. And so fear is this resistance to flow, to the Tao, to the way. And acceptance of it puts you in alignment with flow. So the shared takeaway across these cultures is that every faith equates courage with alignment, with God, with nature, with truth. So fear not is, this ancient nervous system regulation before psychology was ever thought of. And so what happens to the brain on fear is there's these neurocircuits. The fast path is the thalamus to the amygdala to a reflex, an instant reaction. The slow path is the thalamus to the cortex to the amygdala. And so it's a reasoned response to fear. And so reason lags behind instinct. It explains why fear is automatic and why people have a hard time overcoming it. And so what happens on a chemical level is adrenaline floods your system and you get this burst of strength and energy. And then cortisol fires in and you get endurance, and then dopamine fires, and this can amplify just curiosity. It alerts it. What is that? What the heck was that? Like memory and trauma, the hippocampus, it links fear to context, oftentimes by smell. So post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a link through the brain that's running on overdrive. And this chronic fear, over time, it shrinks the hippocampus, which makes it harder for people to learn. And it makes them ruminate on things in the past and things that they said over and over and over and over again. So when you go to sleep every night, your brain gets washed over. And lack of sleep caused by this rumination, it means these thoughts get stuck in your head and they run on loops. And so courage in the brain, the prefrontal cortex, it overrides the fear impulse. Monks, soldiers, surgeons, they show this stronger prefrontal cortex amygdala. These connections through exposing themselves to pain and fear over time, it creates an emotional mastery. And so training your breath, prayer, literal reviewing, journaling, all of these things help you gain that emotional mastery. And so there's this finesse response that happened. It's beyond fight, flight, and freeze. It's flow. An example, a firefighter just calmly giving instructions amid absolute fucking chaos. Modern spiritual practice, like chanting, rhythm, psychedelics, it activates the same regulatory roots that these monks and these soldiers have mastered. So there's a quote by Joseph Ledoux. The amygdala is like a smoke detector. Better to sound a false alarm than to miss a fire. Hafiz, fear is the cheapest room in the house. I'd like to see you in a better living conditions, was his quote. So there are these initiation rites and they appear in cultures over time when a boy is becoming a man. And so cultures used fear to like shape people's identity, to make them brave. And we've lost this, you know. The modern version of this is fucking getting a DUI. You know, that's how our culture initiates men into manhood. Like, but in these tribal cultures and ancient societies, fear was this sacred thing. Like, facing fear was this ritual that transformed boys into men. You know, children became adults when they faced this fear. So without this, cultures, they risk like an emotional adolescence, like a perpetual state of arrested development. One of my favorite shows. There's a Amazon tribe, you know, they make young boys that are going through puberty, they put their hand in a glove of bullet ants for 10 minutes and they repeat it 20 times. There's the Spartan culture. Teenage boys were sent into the wild alone to survive by themselves for a certain amount of time. The Maasai in Kenya, you know, there was a lion hunt that was once symbolized bravery and readiness for responsibility. Aboriginals, they did a walkabout, a solitary journey into the desert, and they were sent there to encounter themselves. Isn't that interesting? Encountering themselves in spirit. So Native Americans, vision quests. Isolation, fasting, hallucination, or revelations happen from repeated dancing. And so the purpose was to convert fear into identity. I have suffered before I belong. It builds community, builds maturity, humility. So the modern society, we lost this. We've replaced initiation with achievement, diplomas, promotion, status. None of these require this like existential fear. So men, we lack like this structured confrontation with pain or death. That's why men do these like voluntary like recreations of like the SEALs, like the Navy SEALs camp. And so we're just stuck in this perpetual state of adolescence. You know, the generations before us, they went to fucking war. They had to confront fear at the beginning. And they bred like crazy when they got back. Something about encountering death makes you want to fuck and procreate. So you can recreate this like martial arts, you know, practicing allowing another man to kill you. Cold exposure is fucking great. You're tricking your brain into thinking it's dying. Psychedelics and the ego death, like silent retreats, wilderness fasts, like these are modern echoes of these old initiations. And so fear that's faced voluntarily, it creates this consciousness expansion deliberately. Joseph Campbell said, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." You need to follow your fear. If you're afraid of something, that means it's fucking important to you. And you're avoiding it because you're a coward. So I had a very powerful psychedelic trip in my mid-20s. I had like 15 grams of mushrooms. I was fucking afraid to do it, but I did it. And what happened to me, I had a dialogue, call it with, you know, my subconscious. Maybe it was with the mushroom. Maybe it was with the spirit of the universe itself. Maybe it was with God. Maybe it was with my shadow. I don't know. But a voice said to me, "Are you afraid?" And I said, "Yes, I'm afraid." And the voice said, "What are you afraid of?" And I said, "I'm afraid that something will happen." And the voice said to me, "Well, I can fucking assure you that something will happen." And it made me realize how stupid my fear was. So the substance, the psilocybin, it removed these emotional filters long enough for that sentence to arise clearly. And I saw that fear is never about nothing. It's always about something. Something can change. Something unknown can happen. Or an expansion is asking to happen. So once you affect that something will always happen, the fear, it loses its teeth. Name your fear and it loses its claws. So psychedelics, they mimic this initiation, ego death, surrender, facing the subconscious. And the mushroom, its teaching, it often echoes these religious texts. Trust the unfolding. Fear and awe are neurologically adjacent, Excitement and anxiety, they're essentially the same emotion. I'm looking towards the future, and it's neurochemically almost exactly the same for me to be excited and anxious. It's just how it's being interpreted. And so we have to weave these things together. We use them as a bridge between like neuroscience and these spirituality segments. So there's a quote I like. The difference between fear and excitement is it's often just breath. Learn how to control your emotional regulation through your breath. It wasn't fear that disappeared when I had that conversation. I just stopped fucking arguing with it. And so courage, it's not a lack of fear. It's choosing to act with fear. Courage is not a virtue. It's the foundation of all virtues. Courage lives in the body. The heart, it's fucking pounding out of your chest, but you're moving forward regardless. And so faith, there's a reason why we call religions faiths. Faith is just trust in a meaning that's greater than any control that you can have. Viktor Frankl, fucking incredible guy, went through the concentration camps. He said, those that have a why can bear any how. You need a purpose. You need a mission in order to overcome fear. So faith and courage, they're neurochemically similar. Like both cause cortisol. So faith and courage, neurochemically, they're super similar. Both of them calm the cortisol response, increase serotonin. And so there's like this surrendering paradox, trying to fucking control everything, it keeps that fear alive. Letting go, it doesn't remove fear. It's changing your relationship to it, your perspective. UFC fighters, surfers, monks, they all train to surrender their reflexes and loosen up in the face of this thing, breathe in patterns of 4, 7s, and 8s, writing down your fears. You're trying to find cognitive diffusion, micro changes, build confidence through repetition. So do the thing you fear and the death of fear is certain. One of my favorite dudes of all time, Ralph Waldo Emerson, said that. Napoleon Hill said, faith and fear make poor bedfellows. That quote's not as great, but I threw it in there. So there's like consistent fears over cultures. Public speaking is number one. I'll tell you why in a second. Fear of heights, very rational fear. You can fall and die. Fear of flying, it's a loss of control. Spiders and snakes, those things fucking killed us throughout history. These are natural fears. Enclosed spaces, probably you had some ancestors that were trapped at some point in time. Like they did this study on mice where they would put a shock collar on them and they would make a sound before the shock as a shock happened. And the mice, eventually when the shock collar was removed, they had the same cortisol response to that sound. They reacted in fear. Not just that, their progeny, their offspring, without having ever experienced the shock, that fear response was encoded to them. So these fears of spiders, snakes, enclosed spaces, heights, very fucking good chance that one of your ancestors almost died or watched somebody die by doing that. Public speaking is an interesting one. It's the number one fear in the world. Public speaking. Why is that? It's because the only time in tribal cultures that you had to public speak was when you fucked up really bad and had to explain yourself and your head was on the literal chopping block. Like, there's a lot of modern fear. The fear of missing out. You know, you're afraid of losing your relevance or belonging to a tribe. There's one called like a nomophobia. It's a fear of being disconnected. AI anxiety, loss of purpose in automation. There's climate fear. You know, people are afraid that the world's going to end due to global warming. A fear of getting canceled. Social exile. That goes back to the public speaking thing. There's weird ones. Tryptophobia. It's a fear of clusters of holes. And so this is wired into us because that's what things look like when they're decaying and getting disease from like these clusters of holes on a decaying corpse. You don't go fucking near that thing. Xanthrophobia is the fear of the color yellow. I don't fucking get that. Turophobia is the fear of cheese. Ablutophobia is a fear of washing. Antidiophobia is being watched by a duck, you know? And so fear, it's the best marketing for emotion. You know, news cycles thrive on cortisol. So it sells faster than facts do, you know? And so healthy skepticism of the news, it's a representation of modern courage. And so there's like a philosophical reframe for all of this. There's a stoic exercise. It's premeditato malorum. Imagine the worst case and it dissolves its power. Willfully sit on the edge of your bed and imagine the worst case scenario. It's taking the power away from it. You know, Buddhism, it says to observe fear. You don't personalize it. So there's like some timeless quotes about fear. Carl Jung. Where your fear is, there your task is. Rumi. Move, but don't move the way fear makes you move. Leonardo da Vinci. He who is fixed at a star does not change his mind for fear of the darkness. FDR. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nelson Mandela. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. There's an old proverb. Fear knocked at the door. Faith answered. No one was there. Leo Sao. Being deeply loved gives you strength. Loving deeply gives you courage. And so in closing, you know, fear is fucking universal. Everybody feels it. And it's been shared by hunter-gatherers, prophets, scientists, CEOs. It's how you respond to it. So what varies is our interpretation. Is it a punishment signal or is it an initiation? So fear not isn't a denial of reality. It's the ancient nervous system's way of saying, trust the fucking process. Every time you face fear consciously, you rewrite your nervous system story. So the goal, it's not to eliminate fear. It's to fucking dance with it. It's your friend. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Thanks for tuning in. Post in the comments what you're afraid of.